is June 6th, 2014, and we are interviewing George Mason at Egleston Park. Mr. Mason was born on March 12, 1940. My name is Cheryl Walker, and I'll be interviewing Mr. Mason. Mr. Mason, for the record, could you state what war and branch of service you served in?
I'm in the United States Army, and the major conflict that I served in was the Vietnam conflict, although I have a lot more to tell about where I served overall in my military career. So if you want me to continue from this point onward, I will, but the rest of the story.
Okay. Did you make a new career?
I stayed in it for a number of years, and then the Army decreased in size, and I got out and stayed in the reserve. So I stayed active with the military for 26 years.
Okay. What was your highest rank?
Lieutenant Colonel.
Okay. Yes, go ahead and share your story with us.
Okay, I joined the Army after college. I was an ROTC graduate in Northeastern University in Boston, Massachusetts. In 1964, I went on active duty. Went to France and served for almost 3 years, and was there for the 20th anniversary of D-Day, and did my thing in the Signal Corps. I was a lieutenant and later a captain there, and served until 1966, and went to Germany for a short period of time when the American forces were leaving France because Charles de Gaulle asked us the military presence to terminate in March of 1967. I stayed in Germany until a little while longer, and then I left Germany with a short leave in between and was assigned to Vietnam in 1967. I served from 1967 to 1968 in Vietnam with the 9th Infantry Division, the 9th Signal Battalion, where I served as an administrative position for the first 6 months, and a company commander for the second 6 months. I left in '68. And at that time I went to signal school at Fort Monmouth for about a year and a half, and then left to go to Bangkok, Thailand, where I served for 2 years in Thailand with the signal organization, where my wife came with me and she taught in school there. And then from Bangkok in 1971, I left to go to Vietnam again for the second time and served from 1971 to 1972. I returned to Bangkok to pick up my wife, who was staying there when she was teaching at the international school. We adopted our first daughter there in Thailand. Left there to, and that was in 1972, to have a short term in the States visiting family, and then went to Germany for a 3.5-year assignment or thereabouts, and served in various parts of Germany. Left Germany in 74 or 5, and went to Texas and served at Fort Hood for about a year before I got out of the Army with the drawdown, and as a reserve officer I went into the active reserves from the active force, and then later went into civilian life in 76 to be a government employee, where I worked for the government for the next 17 or 18 years, and then later worked for 17 years as a contractor for the government, and retired in 2011, and I've been retired since. And I'm a member of the Vietnam Veterans of America in the Clinton County area right now. That's kind of it. There might be some areas where I missed, but you can ask questions if you have some specific things you want to ask.
Okay. Very good. So you were stationed, your first station was Germany?
France.
And you were there for the 20th reunion of D-Day?
Right. I wasn't specifically, involved with the high-level ceremonies, but I was stationed there actually as an active duty military person, as a lieutenant then. But we participated with the French partisans in a local town celebration of the war ending, when we had some ceremonies with them, because all over France that 20th was celebrated as a big event. In all the small towns especially, where they had partisans that fought in the underground, who wore their medals, and they liked to be seen with the Americans who helped them win the war.
How did they treat you?
Very well. Of course, you remember that's only 20 years after the war, and there's a lot of good memories. And the people that were fighters, the 20-year-olds and 30-year-olds were in the 40s and 50s age, and I was about 25, and they remembered the war, and they remembered the Americans who fought, at D-Day and lost their lives there, and all of the events that led up to the various battles, because we lost over 3,000 troops in Normandy. The exact number I'm not sure, but they were good to us. And actually the Germans were too, because they remembered and they were happy that the war ended from their perspective when I went there. So the memories have faded in recent times when I've been there and on TDYs for the government and other working as a civil servant. You could see the differences, not that they were negative, it's just they don't have the memories. And when you lose the memories, that's why organizations and events like this can really be helpful. I'm no hero. The heroes are left over there, and the ones that get wounded, I just happen to participate. Really let that memories continue and hopefully rejuvenate. And I think now, when I get out of Vietnam, it was a very bad time. Most Vietnam vets were thought very poorly by the average folks, but that's changed, and which I'm happy about, especially for our Iraq and Afghani veterans. Now they're showing their respect. They don't pick on the people, the soldiers, because of the politics. They went to war for the country, period. Not for politician A or politician B. Anyway, I think it's better now in some respects because of that. Anyway, did I answer your question? Or maybe more than you wanted.
No, thank you. So then, after France,
after France, we went for a short time to Germany to relocate our company because we had to leave France by March of 1967. All the forces, U.S. forces, had to be out of France. Some of them deactivated, and some of them went to Germany. So I went to Germany for about 9 months and helped us reestablish the unit I was in. And then at that point, I had my orders to go to Vietnam because at that time it was the height of the Vietnam War in 1967. It had occurred during that time. So my wife went back to the States, stayed, in her hometown in Tarkio, Missouri, and I went off to the war in 67, 68, and then came back after that. And then, if memory serves me correctly, I went to a communication school for about a year school. Most of my assignments, except for the last, were overseas. I spent very little time in the States in units, school maybe, but I was overseas. And like I said, I went to Thailand, spent 2 years. My wife spent 3 years. I guess I went to Vietnam again from 71 to 72, and then at 72, then I went to Europe after that for another 3.5 years, and then I was in the 70s. I think 75. 70. Yeah, I get my years a little mixed up here. When I left. Yeah, it was around, that's right, because it was the bicentennial, 1976, I was in Fort Hood, and that's when I got out of the service, 1976. And then lived in California for a short time as a civil servant working for the government, and I continued to come out here, worked here as a civil servant after that. Pretty much from the time I left the service to the short term I spent in California, most of it, my civil service and contractor time was spent here at Scott Air Force Base. Yeah, I didn't mention Scott. That's sort of part of my life.
how long were you stationed in Vietnam?
A year.
A year.
1 year.
Were you stationed at a base camp the whole year?
Yes, I was with company commander. The last part of that time, I was company commander of a signal company. Now, when I say stationed, I had troops all over the Delta that had sites, communication sites on hills. And we were providing communications to the 9th Infantry Division battalions that were up there fighting. So we had a communication mission, Signal Corps, which is primarily what the job is. So that's what I was doing mostly.
When you talk about a signal company, what can you explain what a signal company is?
Yeah, we had a company that had switchboards for people to talk on telephone. We had radio communications so they could talk long distance. We had, what else? We also had a photographic company, which we have combat photographers were in my company, so they would go out with the combat units and take pictures. And I saved some money. And they would take pictures with the combat. So you see the combat photography a lot of those were people that were in signal units. And our company was responsible for that and developing them and sending them off for PR or for publicity or for just for whatever purposes, historical purposes too. So that's what I did in Vietnam mainly, is have a photographic mission as well as some communication sites that we maintained for the division, the 9th Infantry Division. I don't know if that explains it to you now.
What base camp were you stationed at?
It was called Camp Bearcat, in outside of Saigon, in the what they call Three Corps area. I spent approximately half that tour there, and then we moved down further into the Delta to a place called Dong Tam, D-O-N-G-T-A-M, which was the new location for the 9th Infantry Division, where Camp Bearcat became the home for the Royal Thai Division that moved over from Thailand to take over duties in that area. That were allies, that were fighting in Vietnam, not only the Americans. There was Australians, there was the Thai, I can't remember what other units were there, but they took over that, and we spent the last part of that tour down in the Delta. That Dong Tam, which is just a location.
Did you get an R&R during that year?
Yes, and an R&R to Hawaii, where I met my wife.
So you got to see your wife during that time?
I had one, and it was usually authorized one R&R per tour, so I did that there.
How was that, seeing your wife during that time?
Wonderful. Actually, a funny experience. She was there a little before me, and when I arrived from Vietnam, I ran down the long hallways, that the airports are notorious to have, and I slipped on my feet and fell right on my bottom. And I looked up and, hello, honey. It was really funny. We talk about that frequently, how I greeted her. And we had a wonderful, I guess it was about 10 days or whatever, of time together.
Thank you for sharing that.
Not a problem.
Okay, so after your first tour in Vietnam, then you went to Thailand, Bangkok.
Yeah, with a school in between, but that's all right. I just went to signal school. Yeah, then the next major assignment was Thailand, Bangkok.
Okay, so let me go back. And you said with a school, a signal school. That's kind of important because
okay.
Was that signal school was changing,
Yes.
or signal corps was changing quite a bit?
Well, yes, it was located at Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, where it was called they called it. It's a level of expertise that, as a junior officer, you're supposed to have. You go to a school, and that was a 9-month school at Fort Monmouth, where you learned higher skills about communications. Switchboards, how all things work. And this is 1969 to 70 technology. It's nothing like today, but that's where you become more qualified in your career field as a military. And this applied to NCOs, and they always get schools too to help them get better and higher levels of proficiency. So this was a proficiency level school. Went there, then from there, then I went to Bangkok, Thailand. I think it was 1969 actually when we left. In that time frame anyway.
So they were using switchboards for the phone lines?
Ma Bell, when you want to talk to Mabel? We still had those, yeah. And
interesting.
We had, and then of course telephones, the old black phone, the dial phones. Yeah. So the technology was based on the same technology was in the United States. So except they were portable switchboards that were located where you could set them up and run wire to them, connect them, and put all your subscribers on them. So things like that.
Let me ask you, you had telephone communication over in Europe.
In Europe too,
In Vietnam and Thailand and places like that. But was it communications just for Army personnel?
Well, it was depending. Sometimes our mission was to provide communications for all the military in an area, but in the Army, specifically with the 9th Infantry Division, it was basically for all the Army folks. This was an Army. Communications above that level was provided by another signal unit that had what we call area responsibilities that were provided. Who was ever in that area would get COM. In the division, it was for whoever was in the division. And then, just like you have today, you have telephone companies in cities and towns are all interconnected, by the national network and stuff. In the military, they do that too. They have their own networks. Like, you can call on a military phone any base, through special networks in the States. They ride a lot of the same communication pipes that commercials do, but it's just an integrated thing. And when you get to a tactical unit like the 9th Infantry Division, that COM is really just for that division. When they go out of the division, they have units come bringing their interface points into it, and then you can talk. Let's say you're in this zone, you want to talk over there. You might have to go through some interconnecting lines. Same what we do here. But the old business of Ma Bell, where in your local community, that was pretty much like what we were. In the old days, I remember 3 rings. I would pick up my phone. That's at home. Anyway, it's hard to explain completely, but hopefully I covered a little bit.
Did you get to use it for personal use?
Every now and then we'd have morale calls. Yeah, and they weren't always available, but if we didn't get them, we'd have ham radio. Are you familiar with ham radio?
Yeah.
We'd have that too. So we could talk on the ham radio, and every now and then that we could use the military lines, and more so today than in the past because they were more scarce. We didn't have comms back to the States, for instance, in Vietnam. It's readily available. Now today it's more readily available, like email and all that stuff. So it was a little more precious, but you could do it. You could do it, but just infrequently. We used to spend what they call living letters. They were small tapes that took the place of a written letter in Vietnam, and I think it was the second tour too, but you can send tapes back and forth. So that's what I did when I sent the tapes back.
Okay, very good. Now, going back to Thailand, you said your wife was able to be with you.
Yeah, it was what we call an accompanying assignment. It wasn't like being in the war zone. In Bangkok was supporting the war effort, which is the next country over there, over to Vietnam. But they were, relatively unconnected with the battle part. They just were supporting us. A lot of places were like that. Okinawa and places that would provide support to the Vietnam effort. So that's what I was doing. We had communications all over Thailand, and they would interconnect with Vietnam, and then the Thai folks could talk to the Vietnamese. The Thai could talk to the Bangkok military through the interconnecting networks. So I was more in a staff position there, not a tactical unit. So what we call strategic communications, long lines, so people can talk all over using various networks and interconnects. And I spent 2 years in Bangkok in staff positions doing some planning and a couple of operations centers that would monitor communications. So it wasn't in a tactical zone where you would worry about your life. But my wife was a teacher at the international school there, so she was able to stay that 3rd year when I went to Vietnam for the 2nd time. And it was a wonderful assignment. Of course, we adopted our current, our daughter, first daughter, 1972.
Now, have you been back to Thailand?
As a matter of fact, just got back from there. We went on a tour, cruise that took us to China and then Vietnam, and a couple of places there, and also to Bangkok. We ended up just for a short time, but it was nice seeing again. Crowded, very, very busy. Bangkok is a huge city.
Has it changed?
Well, it's hard to tell because it's so big. I couldn't tell. I think it's changed, probably inwardly, but it outwardly looks very similar.
You said that your wife and your daughter were able to stay there while you did your 2nd tour.
Well, we adopted our daughter just as I was getting ready to leave Vietnam, and I came back for a short time on a leave to see my new daughter. And my wife did most of the work, get all of the actions done, because she was abandoned on the doorstep of a teacher friend. She got the baby and called me on the phone and said, "Hey, guess what? We have a little child," because we couldn't have any children. So I came back, I don't know exactly when, but sometime during my tour, and spent a week buying baby clothes and stuff with her and cribs, and took her down to the beach, and she was just a 5 or 6 week old thing, maybe a couple of months by that time. And I went back to Vietnam, finished my tour, came back to Thailand to pick her up on the way back to my next assignment. So she and Terry, of course, spent the last 6 months taking care of my little baby and teaching, and we did have some help. We had a maid that was worked, not lived with us, but worked for us, which was not uncommon. And it's not meant to say that everybody is super rich, but for the Thai people, this was good employment for them, so we were happy to do that. And she was almost a member of the family in many ways. Somsi was her name. Wonderful. I don't know where she is now. But that's how that all happened with the Vietnam, with the Thai experience. So that's a very important connection in our life. Did I answer that?
Yeah, very good. How long was your second tour in Vietnam?
A little less than a year, because 71, 72 was the time of transition in Vietnam, where the military mission was changing to more of a support role, similar to what's going on in Afghanistan, where we call it the Vietnamization of letting the Vietnamese, South Vietnamese, take the war effort under their own. And we would be advisors up to a point. Then we finally ended up letting me know the rest of the story there. So my assignment during that time was shifting all the time. I had like about 4 or 5 jobs because they were disappearing. The missions were disappearing. I was supposed to be an advisor to a Vietnamese division, as a comm officer. That was no longer available. I worked in a staff position, and I was at various locations in Vietnam, down in the Delta. And then, so I had a job for 4 months, a job for 4 months, or a job for 4 months. And I got a 30-day drop, so I spent 11 months in that second tour.
What do you mean when you say a 30-day drop?
Well, we was able to go home. In other words, they were getting so short of actual jobs for people, they were sending people home earlier than the normal 1-year tour.
Okay.
So that was occurring throughout Vietnam because the missions were just going away.
It was because of the time.
Right. The Vietnamization program, and I didn't have as many direct missions. So that let me leave, and I went to Thailand to pick up Terry and Frances, our daughter, and started the next segment of our life.
So how long actually were you there?
11 months in Vietnam, yeah.
So quite a while.
Yeah, it was about a year, but a little less than a year, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And where was your base camp?
Several places. Let me see. The first base camp was down in the Delta near Canto. And then later I went to Long Binh. That's the second base I was in. And then after that, I was there for the close down in Long Binh, which is the largest army base in Vietnam. It's interesting to see that close down. Then I went to Saigon and stayed in the Saigon area for the last 3 or 4 months.
Why was it interesting to see a base close down?
Well, because I remembered it when it was bustling with thousands of troops. And then when I left, there was just basically dogs and rambling bushes, and the desolation of a huge post, no longer as vibrant as it was just a couple of years before that. When I was there in 67, 68, I had been to Long Binh visiting because it was not too far from where I was stationed in the first tour. But it was, just lost all the missions that left, turned it over to the Vietnamese, and I was helped close it down.
Did we leave a lot of remnants there?
Well, in the buildings, yeah, we left a lot of what we call infrastructure, but anything that was not nailed down that we could use somewhere else, we took home usually. And that's typical, unless they negotiate with the governments about what they want to leave. And we left some communication towers and a few things that really can't take down. It costs more money to take them down. That's what's going on now, and maybe Afghanistan, they'll be leaving a lot of stuff there too. That's really not practical. It costs more to take it down, or they want to give it to the problem with doing it, though, is that the Vietnamese didn't have the real training to take care of a lot, and that's a lot of the reasons why I don't say the only reason, but they had trouble, probably, because we have such a logistical trail. We know how to take care of stuff, and a lot of these new nations just didn't have that ability. And we'll worry about that in Afghanistan too, besides other things which you read about, but so we left that way.
Your military time and what you did, Signal Corps, you saw, you had to, I'm assuming, and I shouldn't assume, but you saw a change in how communication was.
Oh yeah, even from 67 to 71, we got more sophisticated, more able to, especially with satellite communications became, it was in its infancy starting up, but we could do a lot more with long distance communications. We used tropospheric in that era too, which was, I don't know if you know anything about communications, but you shoot it off the troposphere and down. That's long distance communication. So we were starting to get a little better at some of that. So many of the techniques that were used in America were either co-developed, so to speak, with American technology, which we applied to the military wherever we could. We went from the cords, to today. So in the 70s, we were getting away from the cordless, the cords. They were getting more electronic, and the switches would actually make the connection rather than an operator. So, like today, you don't ever have an operator make a connection. You dial it, and it goes through the system. It finds out who you are and sends it. We were getting to that point in 71, 72. And, that's how progress occurs.
Your time as a federal employee with Scott Air Force Base.
I was at Scott. I worked for the Defense Information Systems Agency. A little bit with the Air Force, but not a lot. I only worked there for about a year. And then I joined Defense Communications Agency. They later changed the names to Defense Information Systems Agency because of the technology changes and how things evolved. That's where I learned an awful lot more about communications and how the Department of Defense provides communications for all the services, not just the Army, and the Air Force and the Navy. We got a little less parochial and more combined, and you save money that way because it's the technology, the architecture, and all the design criteria, so that the networks would be maybe operated by the Army, Air Force, Navy, but they'd be operated under the DISA guidance and how the structure should be set up. Nobody left the key on. But that's what I've been doing. I've been staying in communication all my life. I've been in comms ever since I went on active duty. Oh, good. Anyway, and I retired 3 years in 2011, so it's three years, I guess now. And but I've been involved with communications, mostly the European area. I've been involved in military European communications more than CONUS-based, state-based, or overseas. So I saw it grow and change to IP technology, and all the things you hear about, all the buzzwords you hear about now, global positioning, satellites, satellite phones, and we're in an era now where it's amazing what we can do with communications.
So you had your fingers in through every conflict?
In the sense of communications, yes. In Iraq and Afghanistan, I dealt a lot with providing communications to special ops and other people that needed it. Not that I knew what they were doing, but we provided long-haul communications, and they would connect on the other end, and so they could talk back. For instance, you get one of the guys in Afghanistan bunker wants to talk to somebody. Technically, in the States, you could do that, because there's technologies there. Not that it's done that much, but get a satellite phone, you can talk to the president right in the foxhole, and that's how we would come. Maybe even I can't even keep up with it, because it's progressed so much, and I'm away from it now for the last 3 or 4 years. But communications and the computer, when they came together, made amazing changes, because the computer made things go faster than just doing this. You think about how it was zeros and ones. Anyway, there's just so much, even way beyond what I can even understand.
So you were constantly going to school?
We were getting education, a lot. And it wouldn't always be, how should I say? It was more, a lot of it was like on the job, because there weren't even schools for a lot of this stuff. Because the early days, even the only companies, AT&T was the only one that had schools, and we used to go to some of their schools. But a lot of that stuff, that the military developed, they didn't even have schools because it happened so fast. So I did go to some schools. We go to seminars. A lot of times it was a seminar-based environment where you learned some new techniques of satellites and new techniques of IP technology and how it applies to various aspects of communication. And depending on the field you're in, you get locked into specific areas, but you still know the broad picture too. So, yeah, you do mostly seminars for me in the last few years. The schools, like I told you about before when I was in the Army, were some of the ones I get the best training.
What made you decide to stay as a, was it federal employee?
Well, when I got out in the 70s, you know, I needed, I had a wife and 2 kids, and I needed the job, basically. And I looked at what my background was for the previous 13, 14 years, you know, after I got out, I was in communications. So it made sense for me to look at government, because I knew I could get a job, well, I shouldn't say I knew, I probably could get a job working with the government in the same related area, providing the DoD expertise that I have with that they might need. And that's what happened. I worked for the government, civil service at GSA with the communications arm there. Then I got a job here at Scott Air Force Base with the Air Force for less than a year. Then I got the DCA job, all in communications, all because of my background. My prior experience in my resume showed all these things that I was involved with. That they wanted somebody who knew communications, and they weren't teaching in colleges things about communications. You had to learn it from schools and OJT-type schools or technical schools. Now you get degrees in IT, you know, and which basically is the new buzzword. You get master's degrees. They were beginning that, and I did try to get a master's in it, but I had to move in IT. But I got a master's in business. So. Anyway, yeah, it was an interesting time because communication was really changing, and it has changed a lot.
Did you use your GI Bill?
Yes, I got my master's degree with my GI Bill. My undergrad was just me, you know, when I got out of college as a young person. Got my master's degree a lot later, about in the 80s. Then I got some other education with the Army. I stayed in the reserves, you know, active reserves all those years. And I got to the rank of lieutenant colonel. So.
Is there anything else you'd like to tell me?
Except, first of all, I'm not a hero. I did my job, and I, you know, served my government and my country. I got a couple of Bronze Stars here, but those Bronze Stars are for service. The important people are the people that have valor in their background. To me, are the real heroes of any conflict, whether it's D-Day, you know, or Vietnam, or Afghanistan and Iraq. Those guys and gals were really the heroes. I'm proud of my service. I don't mean to say I'm not, but I just am humbled at the experience of having been there and know some of my colleagues and Vietnam veterans who have been wounded and, you know, had traumatic experiences. I never had that. I just was steady. Yes, is the best word to put it. I am glad I did it, and I know some people who passed away, as you know, who go killed. Like anybody else who's been involved in a conflict, over time you do eventually know somebody. So, feel for those people, but like I said, they're the real heroes. The ones that are over there. Just as any vet will, any D-Day vet will tell you, they're the heroes. The ones that are still over there or in Arlington National Cemetery or any national cemetery. I'm proud of my service, but I'm prouder of the vets who are the heroes.
What did you get your Bronze Stars for?
Well, during the, especially, I think they were awarded for, when I say service, for my actions as my job as a company commander, for instance, you know, and they weren't for valor. And I just wanted to qualify that, because the guys that were up there shooting bullets and getting bullets and got Bronze Stars and Silver Stars, they have a little V device on them. That's very important, and I always look at that. I don't ever brag about my Bronze Stars, because there were other people who got it, and I'm not belittling it, by the way. It's a very, very, I'm honored to wear that. Mm-hmm. But I don't want it to be construed as a valor award. Those are the ones that I know that people really earned.
But you still got them.
Oh yeah, I got them, yeah, sure. And it's more, when I say for service or achievement, is you've done something that people recognize you for, but it's not for shooting an enemy. You know, it's for getting a job done. And there were a lot of that. In fact, I would say that many, many people in Vietnam were there and did their job and did it well, and never really came out of it, obviously, with any wounds or any Purple Hearts, because that's a very important award too. So we just did our job.
Well, at this time, Mr. Mason, I would like to say thank you for the time that you served our country. And I'd also like to thank you for honoring me with the pleasure of doing your interview.
Well, quite all right.
So, thank you.
Thank you. Bless you too.